You have to create that culture. You have to be the kind of leader who says, I want you to come and tell me if you see me making a mistake. And that's really hard for people, especially for people who have lots of confidence, who feel like they know everything they need to know. I mean, you can imagine going and talking to Steve Jobs and saying, hey, Steve, I think you're wrong. Like that would take a lot of courage. And that's okay. So guess what? If you value that, then maybe courage is a core value, and you train around it and you say, hey, be courageous. And here's an example of what courageous looks like. If you see me telling a customer a lie, I want you to put your finger to your nose. And when I see you put your finger to your nose and then to your ear, I'm going to step out into the hallway with you. And you're going to tell me, I think you are violating the core value of integrity.
As leaders, we can so often get stuck inside our own brains, going around in circles, obsessing over the wrong thing, mishandling a difficult conversation because we're not concentrating, and so on. We can overthink ideas. We can hold out for the perfect solution instead of the good enough. And then at the other end of the scale, some leaders are so action-oriented that their teams just end up drowning in changing priorities and constantly chasing the latest shiny object, while never really following through on the last half a dozen of them. And this can be just as true for experienced senior leaders as it is for new managers still finding their feet. My guest today, Dave Bates, is an executive coach who understands those daily struggles, those challenges, and the opportunities involved. He's been a solopreneur, he's been a chief operating officer, a chief executive officer, and almost everything in between. Dave's clients today experience relief from that pressure of feeling alone at the top of their growing business. He works almost exclusively with chief-level executives, and he is, of course, very well placed to give us some great insights today into the challenges I've just described and others to do with leadership. And I've no doubt that you're going to find this conversation useful wherever you are in your leadership career. And before we start, just a quick reminder to check out www.leadernotaboss.com to sign up for my newsletter. Never miss an update, and you'll also receive an invitation to join my online Integrity Leaders community.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Dave, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to our leadership conversation. As we said, 2 days talking about leadership. What could possibly go wrong?
What could go wrong? I'm grateful to be here.
Amazing. Well, it's great to have you. And we'll kick things off by handing the reins to you, really, to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, your career history, what you do today, and why you do it.
Thank you. It's a long story, so I'll make it short. Well, as short as I can. I started out in my life academically trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I got some really great career advice from my dad after I was getting close to the end of the parental scholarship in college. Like, that means you can't take any more general ed classes because we're not paying anymore. And I was really struggling with what to do. And I was talking to my dad, and he said, well, what do you like to do? And I said, well, I like to talk and I like to write. And he said, so do that. So that's what I did. I went and got a degree in communications and professional writing. And then I went off and started my career at IBM as a technical writer in the PC company here in the US. And one thing led to another. I had an opportunity to be trained as an executive coach by IBM's first sort of internal executive coach, the lady named Jane Cresswell, who started the program. She trained me, and at one point she told me, hey, Dave, God created you to be a coach. And I said, thank you very much. And I'm going to go off and spend the next 20 plus years being an operational guy. And so we have worked in startups, funded startups, and one of the then largest raises here in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. Back in the early 2000s, we raised $55 million in Series A funds. And got a lot of leadership experience there, lots of opportunities, learned some really powerful lessons. And then the dot-com bubble burst, and our IPO filing went with it. And that started a series of many years of doing a lot of different things. And I've worked in solopreneur kind of capacities. I've worked in small startups and early stage companies, and also sort of large companies. And a couple of years ago, I came to the place where it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'm ready to lean back into being a coach. And so about 5 years ago, I started a company. It's just me as an executive coach to really leverage 30 years of leadership experiences. Right out of college, my first job, it was less than a year before I was in a formal leadership position, and I really haven't been in anything else since. So really gained a lot of experience learning from folks over that time. And now my company's called Paravelle, and it's called that on purpose. It's about walking together with leaders through their leadership journey. And so I'm one part coach and one part consultant, and ICF folks probably shuddered here. I do follow a lot of the ICF coaching practices, but there are some times where I've found that sometimes the consultative skills are helpful to really senior leaders. Mostly I work with the C-suite leaders and founders of technology companies and services companies mostly. It's a great job. The why is because I think God put me on the planet to walk alongside of folks and to share what I've learned and the perspective that I have.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, and it's great to talk to someone who's found their purpose and then they've found a way to actually follow it. That's always great to see, and I love hearing stories like that. Your career so far, you've done it all really. You've been a business by yourself. You've been in the C-suite of various types of roles and different kinds of companies, as you've just described. I mean, what would you say are like the biggest similarities and differences between all those different types of entity that you've worked for?
It's a good question. I think similarities are that the only way we get anything done is with other people, right? Like even as a solopreneur, we have our clients, we have partners that we work with. We have suppliers, right? Like people we depend on. And I think that is the thread that is the same across all of them. I think the other thing is it's important to know what your purpose is. Like there's your personal purpose, and then there's your business purpose. And how do we get there? How do we leverage the resources that we have available to us? I was reading a book recently called The Outsiders, and it's written by a guy named Thorndike. And he talks about the CEO's job. Number one job is capital allocation, and that's human capital and financial capital. And that's true whether you are a solopreneur or whether you're a mid-level manager or whether you're the CEO of, a FTSE 500 company, right? It doesn't matter. You have to allocate capital. As a solopreneur, that's your time and your attention and the maybe limited money that you have available. You got to make priority decisions. And that's the same regardless. And we have to do that with the people. So we can't alienate people, can't kowtow to people. We got to find the right balance of how to inspire people towards the objective and to be human and support them in that process. So those are, I think, key things that I would say would be similarities.
It's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
there's plenty of differences, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. We'd be here for the rest of the week, probably.
Maybe there'll be a time for another.
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah, but I think that the common theme, it's always going to come down to the people, isn't it? Whether it's, even if it's people you're working for as clients or people you rely on as suppliers, even if they're not directly in your employ, it's still, as you say, it still matters. Yeah.
And I think that among those things, that the leaders that are most successful are the ones who committed themselves to understanding how to communicate with other people. I told you I have a degree in communication, so by default, I guess I'm biased, but I think it's critical. It's the one skill we all share.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those kind of the common skills, if you like, that so many other things rely on as well. I mean, leadership is pretty much impossible if you can't communicate effectively. So yeah, in fact, I've had conversations with other communications coaches, funnily enough. Now I think about it, maybe there was a bias there, but we had a very interesting debate around, could you actually just replace the word leadership with communication? Or are they interchangeable even? I'm not sure where I sit. I'm probably back on the fence again.
Yeah, I would say that you can't. And I think that they are, communication is an important and supporting skill. And a lot of people talk, this is a personal bee in my bonnet, so we'll be on a rabbit trail if you let me, and we'll come back off of it really quickly. A lot of people talk about communications as a soft skill. And they do that because they think hard skills are things you can learn in the classroom. They're things you can test for. Well, I have a degree in communications. It means I went to a classroom and I was tested on my understanding of the body of knowledge, right? So that can't be the test of whether there's a hard skill or a soft skill. And I laugh a lot. I say, for car people, you want to get in your car and you want to go from point A to point B. If I take the soft tires off, how will you get there? It doesn't matter how great your car is and how great the sheet metal is. Without the tires, you can't get there. And so I think in leadership and communications is a similar way. The communications are the tires that attach to the road that take your leadership skills from point A to point B, right? It's not the only one. You have to have the technical skills as well. But I think it's really important. And that's why I don't think it's a synonym, but I think they're super, super tied.
It's a good analogy. I like it. I don't know. I've always kind of been a bit skeptical about the whole soft skills definition. It just always felt to me like almost a thing for a manager who doesn't want to invest in training. So they just say, oh, well, it's a soft skill, so you don't really need training in it. You just have to practice.
Yeah, I can talk for a while about how that label came to be what it is, and I really encourage people. This is what I love about Seth Godin's approach to it. He calls them real skills, and I think they're all real skills. I think the communications is just as real as an engineering skill. Way different for sure, and one's mathematically more complicated than the other. But, think about the human equation and the variability that we all have as people, and how we think and how we talk and how we interact and how we feel. Those things, those are pretty different.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Tell us more about some of the really high pressure leadership challenges that you faced, and what were the key things that they taught you?
The thing that comes to mind first when you ask me about that is about a time where when I worked at that startup I mentioned to you before, I got on a plane. We bought a company. It's a good thing to do with investment funds, right? But we bought a company, and I got on an airplane and I flew out to meet a customer. Never talked to these folks before. And when I got there, I went into this beautiful conference room. It was a home builder out in Southern California. And I walked in this beautiful conference room, this beautiful building. And all these really angry people were sitting on the other side of the table. I had no idea. This was literally just, I thought I was going to meet this customer and just understand what was going on. And they essentially basically told me they were going to fire our company. I mean, today, thanks for coming, you're fired. I was the director of technical services. I had a field service team that worked for me. I had some trainers that worked for me, and call center, and just a whole bunch of different kind of technical service folks. In that moment, it's a big challenge, right? What do you do? Nobody prepared me for that moment. So I guess I was a little plucky, and I said, well, did you call me all the way out here just to fire us? Or do I get a chance to hear why we're being fired and what's been done? And they're like, okay, well, since you asked that, here's the litany of problems. And so I sat there and wrote down a bunch of stuff. And then I said, well, what next? And they said, well, fix it or you're fired. We want an answer today. I just learned about this. What am I supposed to do? And this is like hundreds of millions of dollars a year company. They're not a small builder out there. And so I just asked him for some time. I said, look, I need to go talk to my team. I need to do a little bit of investigation, but here's what I'll commit to do before the end of the day today, 5:00 California time. I'll give you an update. I will not have an answer, but I'll have an update. And then within 24 hours, I'll have a plan. And that was good enough to not get fired that day, but I might be fired the next day. I don't know. Right. And so, so I left and I went and visited the field service team. And then I called back to my folks here in the Raleigh area, put together just sort of a preliminary sketch. And I went back and I talked to them the next day and I said, I don't have a full solution, but here's what I did. And here's what's coming next. I need 24 more hours. And by 24 more hours, so now we're about 48 hours in, we have a plan. And we have and they're happy. And we made all of the money back that we were supposed to make back. And we solved the core underlying issues. And basically kept the account and grew the account and all the kind of stuff that comes with that. I wish I could say that was the only time that I had been surprised. I had another experience working with a major pharmaceutical company here in RTP. Same thing. My boss asked me, hey, could you just check in on how that project's going? And I walked into an absolute hornet's nest. And those things are challenging, right? Nobody prepares you for that. Like to go in all by yourself. I'm not the CEO. I'm just like the director of services, right? In one place, I was just a project manager. But the idea of coming alongside somebody, understanding what the pain point is that they're describing, and then asking, what can I do? How can I take responsibility? I don't own it. I didn't make the mess, right? So I couldn't sit there and say, hey, that's not my problem. I didn't. What do you want me to do? That's beyond my pay grade, right? Or you can say, okay, this is a challenge and I'm up for the challenge. So what can I do? And take the next logical step towards finding a solution that puts you and that person on the same side of the table. So those are just two examples of some pretty big challenges that I faced. There've been lots of other ones, but those are pretty impactful ones that come to mind when I hear you ask that question.
What I like about that, particularly in the first example, I think a lot of people in that situation, you hear, well, we're going to be letting you go kind of thing, where we're going to seek alternative suppliers or whatever. You immediately get defensive. You probably make it worse, and you're going to just walk out of there, and that is the outcome. You don't think any further. But what you've demonstrated there by the power of just asking a question and communicating, you went from you are definitely being fired to you might be fired by the end of the day to it might be tomorrow actually, or the day after. And you did that within the space of one meeting. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive example of the power of just staying calm and asking the right question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And that's, I'm glad you mentioned that, because your mindset is really what drives it, right? I wish I could say now that I knew the why. It was just survival for me at that point, right? But now looking on, 20 years on, I can kind of see how understanding my personality and the way I work, made a difference. So I think as a leader, one of the biggest investments you can make in yourself is learning how to keep your emotions in check. It doesn't mean you can't be emotional, right? But it means that you know what's happening inside your head, and you can prevent your mouth or your hands or your face from doing things that are not what will help the situation, right? And it doesn't mean you just have to be a poker player. It's good for people to see emotion, to know that you're not some robot, but being able to be aware of sort of your instincts and being able to ask, is that helping me or is it likely to hurt me? Don't want to get paralyzed by that, but being aware, right? Investing in knowing who you are and how you're made. And then how does that manifest itself in your leadership work? That's a really important investment to make.
Yes. And we hear a lot about emotional intelligence these days, don't we? And not just in the field of leadership, but obviously it's relevant here. And I think one overlooked aspect of that a lot of people miss or forget is it's understanding your own emotions as much as it is those of others sometimes, that self-awareness piece, and then the self-regulation as well, as you said. And I think, we can all think of examples of leaders we've worked for or with, I'm sure, who were really bad at this in one respect or another, who were just, heart on their sleeve kind of person who they just react immediately and usually make it worse.
Right.
And I think at the same time, though, there is that line to walk between regulation and then being authentic. And as you say, not just being a robot.
Right.
And it is, I think that's one of the most difficult things about leadership, actually. Yeah.
You're getting ready to let somebody go, right? Like you can break down in that. Like I fired a lot of people, some of them for cause and some of them because we had to lay them off. And there's not one of them, like even the worst performing person that I've had to let go, like, there's a part of you, oh man, this is not fun. Right. But you can't let that get in the way of effectively, doing the work. Great. You got a box of dishes. I mean, like at some point, it's okay to be human and you still have to do the job.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's quite a difficult example as well, of course.
It's one of the more difficult ones for sure.
Yeah.
There are surely others that are even more difficult than that, but yeah, everybody can kind of understand that that's where it is.
Yeah, and I guess at least it has the finality to it, so it's going to be one difficult conversation and then not an ongoing issue, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happens. Like I wrote a letter to a team once. I was really, really frustrated with them. I had a lot of conversations and put them through some group coaching and just weren't performing. And the situation was such that I couldn't just replace the team, even though that was my recommendation. That the folks that I work for, talk about a challenging situation. You got an underperforming team and you can't do anything about it. So I wrote them a letter. I still have it somewhere around here, and it was about 3 pages in which I explained to them how frustrating it is to be a leader who's in the middle. This is middle management challenge, right? I have managers and I have a manager, and I wrote them a letter about return on investment, in which I explained to them why I was so frustrated, because I am managing a budget. I am a steward of a budget, and I need to return something to the people who gave me that budget. And I told them, like, I'm not looking for a return of my investment. If I spend $100,000 on salaries this month, I don't want $100,000 back. I want $120,000 back, or at least $100,001. Like I need to get some kind of return on my investment, because we're not here just to give people money, right? We're here to achieve stakeholder values that include the operating capital that we need to keep the lights on and to expand the team and to serve more people. And so that was an example where, as I thought about it, right, I can express the frustration in a different way. And it actually worked. The managers finally got the picture and they started doing it. It was a little bit too little, too late. And we ultimately only had to let go of one of those folks in that particular time frame. So it was a good outcome, but they knew I was frustrated, right? I didn't hide that I was frustrated, because they were actively preventing me from being able to do my job as the director. So I think that, there is a place for that emotion, and we just have to know when and how to use it.
The thing that stands out to me from that story is that there was some bad leadership elsewhere in your organization.
Well, with empathy, they had a tough shot, right? And
sure.
and I would say also that that's a decision that in hindsight, especially now having occupied their chairs and other chairs, I would say was bad call.
Yeah. Well, as you say, with hindsight, I suppose it's a lot easier, isn't it? But I don't know. I think I'm having been through, not quite at the same scale, but a similar experience a couple of times as well, where you've got what I would call the toxic high performer, or even just the toxic performer. And the sales example comes up quite a lot in the social media articles about this kind of thing, about even if they're your best salesperson, if they have an active negative effect on everyone else in the team, it doesn't matter. You've got to solve that issue.
Yeah. And this is the leadership lesson that I think people miss a lot. That's what we call total cost of ownership. So we think about that when we build software or when we buy an asset or something like that, but we don't always think about that in the team concept, right? And the team context. So what is the total cost of ownership of having that toxic person? And it's hard. It requires some really, really hard leadership decisions.
It does. Yeah. And I think, it's easy to just say, just fire them. They're harming the rest of the team, get rid of them. But I think, again, if we apply a bit of empathy to that situation, then maybe they don't realize the impact their behavior has, or they've got something else going on in their life outside of work that's just filling up their capacity, and they can't be anything else at work right now. So, the knee-jerk reaction to just get rid of them or start the performance management, that dreaded phrase, might not be the best solution. And I always like, if I can, to start with a conversation first. But again, it's hindsight, isn't it? It's not always that easy in the moment.
Right. Well, and I think you're on a good point there, right? What is going on, right? That's the manager's responsibility, is to figure out what is going on. And you have to be very careful with that. Depending on where you are in the world, your legal and regulatory construct allows you to do some things, prevents you from doing other things. And we don't want to make assumptions, but there's so many roots here. One of the challenges is actually in job design. It's actually in culture, right? The culture includes the behaviors that we say we want, but it also includes the behaviors that we tolerate. So we have somebody who's in this toxic way. Well, now we got to ask the question, is it actually toxic, or do I just feel like it's toxic? Right? How do I know that it's toxic? Like, okay, if I can really see and observe that it is in fact toxic, now I have to take the next step of figuring out what is the root of this toxicity. So let's say they're delivering the results that they need, that the organization needs them to deliver, but it's, use the popular phrase, it's a dumpster fire, right? And nobody wants to come to work, and engagement is dropping, and other people aren't getting their work done. Great. And now how do we have a candid conversation? I'm reading Radical Candor right now by Kim Scott, and she defines it as both caring and being willing to have the hard conversation, right? The caring doesn't prevent you from having the conversation, and you don't just go off and, beat on the table with somebody. It's both and, right? And so sometimes we have to think about job design. Like, hey, if you can't bring yourself to work in this way, we may be able to accommodate you by changing your job, right? So that you can have the cycles and the space you need to take care of whatever issue it is that you need. And maybe there's an employee assistance program that needs to get brought into play, or maybe it's just too stressful and there's a different job that person can be in and reduce their stress. Sometimes there's not. And then we have to go through that process of, performance improvement. I actually don't think performance improvement is a dreaded word, because it's supposed to be restorative, right? It's a dreaded word because it's been abused so much.
Yeah.
But when we say, look, there is a gap between what we expect of you and what you are delivering, that's a generous thing to tell somebody. Because what if they didn't know? What if they thought they were doing great and they were just kind of clueless about it? And now we've set in motion a very clear set of measurable things that put them on a restorative path. And at the end of that, and hopefully even before the end of it, they're back where they need to be and everything is going great. a lot of times with an improvement plan, what ends up happening is that person gets an improvement plan and they pull the ripcord and they're out of there, because they think they're doing a great job. And that's an okay outcome of a performance improvement plan, because we did our job as managers to put them on notice about the expected behavior, and they chose to separate, and the organization's going to be healthier for it. So I think part of it has to do with our perceptions and challenging the assumption that because I've always heard of a performance improvement plan as being a negative thing, that it is a negative thing. But as a manager, you get to choose. You get to choose what your organization is like. Whether the whole company above you is toxic because everybody hates them, but there's this little pocket where everybody's like, wow, what's going on with that team? I want to work on that team, right? Because you've created this culture, even within the larger culture, which is, I'm here for you to be successful. That's the job of a manager, to create the conditions. A leader, I say this all the time, it's a leader's job to create the conditions for the people to flourish. Right? I can't make them. I can't motivate somebody. I can't make somebody engage, but I can create the conditions. I can cultivate the soil around the plant. The plant still has to grow, right? Yeah. But I can put some fertilizer in. I can look and, it's a little bit wet. Needs a little bit of water. Oh, it's too much water, right? That's my job as a leader, is to pay attention to what's going on in the organization and make sure that I've created the conditions in which it can flourish. And sometimes my plant is growing in the desert, and so I got to adapt and adjust. Sometimes it's growing in the rainforest. Well, I probably don't need to give it water every week if it's growing in the rainforest, right? So paying attention to the season in which your plant, your organization, your team is growing is the job of the leader, paying attention to all of those kinds of things. So I'm getting up on my soapbox, so I'm going to step down from it.
No, I think you're right, though. I quite often say something very similar. It's, the leader's role is, it's not to go around and do all the work for everyone. It's not to micromanage. It's not to just shut your office door and only talk to people once a year at an appraisal or something. Your role is to create the environment in which others can succeed. That is what a leader is for. Terminology with manager as well, there's maybe other connotations to manager, but definitely with leader, 100% with you there. And I think, the whole performance improvement thing, I don't know what the rules are like in the States, but certainly in the UK, there is a perception that it's a negative, because in a lot of cases, not always, but in a lot of cases, it's not really being used as an improvement tool.
Right.
It's being used as a compliance tool before they can fire someone.
Sure. Yeah. And that's how it's used a lot of times, probably more often than not in the US as well. And what I'm suggesting is, this is a show about, leaders. Absolutely. And how to lead. And just because that's the way it is, doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. So Absolutely. As you're an emerging leader, what would happen if when you hired somebody, you said, hey, this is how it works. These are the outcomes that we're looking for you to produce in this role. And if you're not producing, and we're going to find that out in our one-on-ones, the goal is to never end up having to do an improvement plan. But hey, we do them, because sometimes that's what it takes in order to really clearly understand the nature of what's expected. So if you ever get one, know that our goal with this is to be restorative. Again, the manager and leader thing, you can be a manager and you can be a leader and be the same person. You can be an individual contributor and a leader and be the same person. There's a positional leadership role, and then there is a behavioral leadership role. And some managers are not leaders. So, and some CEOs are not leaders. It's important to understand that distinction. If you aspire to be a leader of people, you have to understand that it's a behavioral and mindset role, not a positional one. And sometimes they overlap each other. So if that's true, then I have the freedom to be the leader in my department, regardless of what my company is doing. Now, again, I have policy. I have to pay attention to those kinds of things. But the way I position those things within my team, within my organization that I happen to be manager of, I have an option there, and I can choose to explain that. I can choose to help people understand that my goal is to restore people to robust, good performance if they're not there. And that shows that I care about the people that I'm leading. So it's a hard thing though, because so culturally, like, we've grown up generation after generation after generation of like, this is the tool we use to bludgeon people when they're not performing. And so we grow up and people are like, well, that's the tool we use when we bludgeon people for not performing. And nobody stops and says, what if we didn't bludgeon people? What if we helped them instead?
Yeah. Maybe if we change the name of it, call it something else. Something that sounds a bit more optimistic. Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows? Let's imagine a world in which that's a different way. It's just, it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah. Labels
and words matter. If no other point to what we were talking about earlier, right? The words matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're spot on with what you say as well about the setting and then managing the expectations. And I think that's quite an important thing to do in both directions as well. But if you get that right, and then you're having those regular one-to-ones, you're right. I mean, the goal is you never have to use that performance improvement, whatever phrase we could use to describe it, but that thing.
That thing.
In the ideal world, that thing that shall never be mentioned won't have to be used. But, you know, I agree with you. I mean, it is the right aspiration, definitely, to see it more as a restorative, as a helping people improve genuinely, like what the actual word literally means, as opposed to what it has come to be understood as.
Right. For sure.
And I think all of this feeds quite nicely into the next question, which is about core values. So values, again, is another buzz phrase, isn't it, in the world of management speak. Yeah. What do you think is the right way to use core values in your company then?
Yes. I will tell you a story about the wrong way to use them. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I think about core values. I worked in a company once in which the top core value, mission, vision, guiding principles, the top core value was integrity. Our integrity is never compromised. And I was in a project and was expecting somebody to show up, and they didn't show up. And I got on the call, and it's a critical role, right, for this client. And on the phone, and I said, this was a video call, and I said, hey, where is the guy? And they said, hey, he's not coming. Why isn't he coming? Well, because we had to send him over to some other project. Okay, well, did anybody think to tell me that before, 9:30 in the morning when the client's asking, where is the guy? Yeah, sorry, we messed that up. Like, okay, well, what am I supposed to tell the client? And they said, tell him his grandmother died. What? Are you serious? You want me to go into that guy's office and tell him this guy's grandmother died? Yeah, and he won't worry about it. I'm like, let's stop and think about this for a second. If I tell him his grandmother died and he says, oh, that's terrible, where should we send flowers? What would I tell him? And now I have to go and tell all the other guys on the team, hey, this guy isn't coming. We're supposed to tell the client that his grandmother died and he's at the funeral. And they're going to ask me, did his grandmother die? And I'm going to say, no, he's over at this other client. But I need you guys to tell the client that. Like, what part of mission, vision, guiding principles, what part of our integrity is never compromised is that? And their answer was, well, good luck. If you don't want to say that, go figure it out. So I went into the guy's office and I said, hey, this guy isn't coming. And he got really upset. And I said, here's the problem. I talk about these situations that happen. I don't have a plan yet. I didn't go hide out and try to figure out what the plan was. I just went in his office and I said, here's what I know. And here's what I'm going to do next. And I said, he said, well, why isn't he coming? And I said, because we sent him to a different client. Well, that didn't go real well. Except that after he got his emotions out, I said, hey, listen, if your project was in the situation that project is in, we'd be taking people from that project and bringing them here. So the good news is Our project isn't in that situation. We just have to adjust for the speed bump. So let me have some time. And by the end of the day, you notice the pattern here? By the end of the day, I'm going to come back and tell you what I found. I might not have an answer, but I'll tell you where I am. And it was great. And I got on the phone with them at, 4:30 in the afternoon. They're like, well, how'd it go? And I said, oh, it went great. And they said, oh, good. So he bought it? And I said, no, I told him what actually happened. And they went, no, you didn't. I'm like, yeah, I did. And what did he say? Oh, he said he was glad that we would do the same for him. Right. So what's the problem? I think the problem's obvious. What's the role of core values in your business? You have to actually live them. Like, you have to know what they are and they have to be clear. I was just having a kind of a workshop session with a client this week, in which they showed me their core values. And would you fire somebody if they didn't do that? No, I wouldn't fire them. Like, oh, okay, well, that's probably not a core value then. Like, it's not the only test for a core value, but it's a really good one, which is, if you lie to me, I'm going to give you the opportunity to not lie to me again. But if you lie to me a second time, you don't have a place here. Well, then that's probably a core value. So, and I think a lot of times we conflate management practices with core values. Core values are beliefs, and they are statements that are unambiguously clear, and they are well understood, and they are lived out. We hire based on them. We hire employees and contractors and suppliers and customers using them, and we fire those people using them. They're part of a job interview. Here are our core values. Tell me about a time when you demonstrated this in this way, right? I don't really have one of those times. Okay, well, pick a different core value. Tell me about a time, right? If you can't show me that you know how to live this value based on this definition, we probably don't have a place for you, and you shouldn't hire them no matter how technically skilled they are, because they're a bad fit and you're going to end up one of those toxic workplaces. So it starts at the very top with the leader and saying, these are the core organizations don't have values. They're not people. People have values. And so what we say is, these are the set of beliefs that we agree we will use to govern our decision making, and they will permeate what we do as an organization. They're not just things we put on a business card. It's great to put it on a business card or on a poster on the wall, but if you don't live it, it's not a core value, and you're just checking the box and being buzzword compliant. So we look at these things, and if you have a whole lot of them, you probably need to shorten the list. And if you have a cute little acronym for your core values, it's possible that the acronym drove the values, not what you actually believe. It's not that acronyms are bad. It's that sometimes we can be like, look, we have 5 of these and we need one more. And if we just use this letter, it will be really cool. And then we end up with this core value that's kind of not really core. And so I think that's how we use core values. We define them early. They support the mission that we're on. They are not necessarily only my behaviors, but they're the ones that allow us to accomplish the mission. And then we train on them and we evaluate people on them. We say like, hey, that behavior was not in line with the core values. You need to change that, or we have to have a different discussion. And that's how we use core values. So we invest heavily in getting them right. They don't change over time. And then we communicate them and we make decisions based on them. That's how we use core values to our advantage, to the result that we're looking for completing the mission for the purpose that our organization exists.
I like that you mentioned buzzwords, because I think one of my pet peeve, maybe one of the issues I have with the whole concept of values, as it is so often misunderstood. And I'm going to preface this by saying I have absolutely no problem with people who work in PR and marketing. It's a very important part of any business.
It is.
And most of the people I've encountered who've worked in that have been really good at their jobs. However, I don't think that the core values of a business should be driven by PR and marketing. It should come from leadership. Hence my liking the word buzzwords. Is buzzword a buzzword?
Yeah,
Maybe.
probably, and that's okay. I think that this goes to the mechanism of core values, and I'm working on a presentation right now about culture at work, and in the early days of an organization, when it's just getting started, those core values are synonymous with the founder's core values. And ideally, they're aligned with the mission and so that over time, they don't really have to change. And if you think about your culture as a seedling, when it's being founded, right? When the company is being founded, it's a seedling and it's really small and it's not really viable. You could step on it and kill it, whatever. So the founder invests heavily in that. And then it kind of grows into a sapling or maybe a young tree. And you've brought in a couple of key players. You've been really careful, or you should have been, about who you bring in. Maybe it's a co-founder, maybe it's, these 3 or 4 strategic hires. And you've made sure that they understand these core values. So one of the tripping points is we forget to do that because we're so into caring for the plant, for the mission, that we just say like, hey, you have this set of skills and I need it. Come on in. Right. And we don't really pay attention to this is what causes founder fallout a lot of the time. A topic for another conversation, but that founder and CEO own that vision, that mission, that purpose, and the core values that support them. And then as it grows and matures, and you start hiring managers and hiring department heads and key leaders and stuff, the CEO is still responsible, or the managing director, or whoever it is still responsible for keeping that vision and the mission and the core values all aligned with each other. And the board, if there is one, is providing support for that and accountability for it. And so that's what keeps it from being a buzzword. It's not and we don't build it by consensus. I'm going to write a post here soon about the difference of building by consensus and building consensus. Right? We don't ask the people in the organization, what do you think our core values should be? We say, these are the core values, and they are tied directly to the mission that we're on. And that mission is tied directly to our purpose, our vision, right? And so if that's true, we don't do that by consensus, but we build consensus around them. We say, like, these are our core values. This is how we define them. Is it unclear to you? Oh, okay, we can make it more clear, right? And so I think your point is well taken, that it is a leadership job, but it is the job of the most senior leaders to both define and guard them over time. And that's what keeps our organization mission true, right? On task with the mission.
Yes. One of the other practices I really like, which I've rarely, if ever, I think, seen used effectively, is you empower everyone within the organization to call you, the leaders, out if you fall short of the values, which can lead to some pretty unpleasant confrontations. Hence why I've not seen it done well. But
yeah, well, I think that's the whole premise in Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor, is that you have to demonstrate that and you have to enable it. There's some really good stories. I'm early in the book, but there's some really good stories that she lists there about how people do that. And her language choices are not always consistent with my language choices in the book, but that the truth that she's communicating in there is relevant. And you have to create that culture. You have to be the kind of leader who says, I want you to come and tell me if you see me making a mistake. And that's really hard for people, especially for people who have lots of confidence, who feel like they know everything they need to know. I mean, you can imagine going and talking to Steve Jobs and saying, hey, Steve, I think you're wrong. Like that would take a lot of courage. And that's okay. So guess what? If you value that, then maybe courage is a core value, and you train around it and you say, hey, be courageous. And here's an example of what courageous looks like. If you see me telling a customer a lie, I want you to put your finger to your nose. And when I see you put your finger to your nose and then to your ear, I'm going to step out into the hallway with you. And you're going to tell me, I think you are violating the core value of integrity.
Yeah.
I want you to do that. And then when they do that, you don't beat them up. You say, thank you. That's what I asked you to do, and you did it. And I know that must have been really hard for you. This is difficult for a lot of leaders to do. And it's a practice you have to cultivate.
I think for me, it always comes down to the pretty simple concept of leading by example. You know, if you're not living those values, if you're not demonstrating them, then why should anyone else?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you know, everyone's human. We're all imperfect. We're all flawed. We all make mistakes. So having that mechanism whereby others can point it out to you and help you get back on course is also really important. And I don't think those two things necessarily have to be at odds either.
Yeah. False choices are everywhere.
Indeed. I just realised the time. We've been going nearly an hour. It's been flying by. So I'm going to skip over a few questions because I think we've covered them anyway. Here's an interesting question for you. What has been your own best experience of being led?
Another great question. You have great questions. I have two of those, and for the sake of time, I'm trying to decide which one to tell first. I'm going to tell them both, and you can clip them out if you want. That's what editing is for. Right? So I had a manager who was a fantastic manager, a guy named Mike. I'll even use his last name. Is that all right? Can I use his last name? Yeah, I'll use his last name. Mike Umerick. He was he worked with me. I worked for him at a consulting company for many years. We got on this project, and it was a bit of a bonfire, and a couple of us were working up in New Jersey, and Mike. The reason that Mike is such a great example of a leader is because he asks this question: what can I do? How can I help? And we're like, hey, Mike, there's really not a lot you can do. I mean, it was arguably Mike's fault that we were in the situation that we were in. Not the root problem, but the fact that he had asked us to get involved, and we were there, and he was constantly asking if we were okay. What did we need? How could he help? And I will remember one time we were in a conference room up in New Jersey, and in walks Mike. Right now, New Jersey is not far from Baltimore. It's a couple hours drive, but Mike walked in and he's like, I'm here. What can I do? You need me to make some copies for you? Like, wow, here's this guy that leads the practice, and he walks in and he's like, I'll go get you some food. We didn't have Grubhub back then. Maybe Pizza Hut would deliver to your office or something, but that was just the kind of guy that Mike is. And so he's asking for what would be arguably an unreasonable task, but he's empathetic and understanding enough that we're humans, and that, we're doing our best. And, it's one thing to direct the troops from a long way off, and another thing to get on your horse and go out there on the battlefield with them. And sorry for the military reference if any of the folks listening are not comfortable with that. But I think there's something about being in the thick of it with you. And then the second example I will give, is a lady named Anne. And I think she might have gotten married or had a change or whatever. I don't know what her current last name is, but Anne was a really senior leader, and in the first job that I had at IBM. And, she was like my third line manager. And I walked in the door the first day, clueless. Here I am at IBM. And she walks down the hall and she's like, hey, Dave. Hey. I'm getting in my office. I'm like, who is that? And they're like, oh, that was Anne. Well, what's she do here? Oh, she's in charge of it. Right. So, I mean, she knew my name on the day I started, right? It was a small thing, probably not a big deal to her, but, it was really impactful to me. And so fast forward, we got in a room, all of us, as sort of the leaders who had to deliver some things. And she had this really crazy request that she wanted to make. I'll spare the details, but there was a line of products that we needed to produce that was mandated by the corporation. And Anne sort of instinctively knew that this was a mistake. And she had done her best to sort of push up and say, this is a mistake. We shouldn't do this. And the answer she got was, do this or else. And so she brought us all into the room, and I remember like it was yesterday, and it was 30 years ago. She said, listen, I need everybody that's here. I need to know that one, what we're talking about here isn't going to go outside this room except on a strict need to know basis. And every one of us had to go around the room and physically say yes, just like being in the exit row on the airplane. I need a yes. Yes, I got it. And she said, the problem is that if I take this into the channel will reject it and we will be out of business. But the executives are requiring us to do it. So here's what I propose we do. But I can't do it unless we all do it. And that is, we have to make a second set of products that goes along with the first one. And that's a huge amount of work and a big, big risk for her. And so we all said yes, and we all went in and we did it. And they went and they sat down with some of the biggest names of, consumer electronics distributor channels that you would know from the mid to late 90s. And they said, hey, that's a really nice product line and we don't want any of it. And all the executives were like, well, you have to take it because they said, no, we're going to give your shelf space to Compaq and HP and Dell. And so we aren't going to take it. Or we'll take your machines, but we'll put them back and then we'll ship them back to you because they didn't sell. And so Anne said, well, would you consider a product lineup that looked like this? And they said, oh yeah, we'll take that. We'll take all of them. How many can you give us? And so Anne, just that demonstration of leadership was so powerful. She, they created a challenge for the executives. This story we all told was that she had to go and pay her dues for violating the corporate overlord's directive, but then she popped out as an executive VP somewhere a couple of years later. We literally had no idea what happened to Anne. But the thing that was demonstrative about good leadership was she understood the business problem that we had to solve. She registered pretty much an existential threat to the livelihood of 120 people. And she said, here's a plan. I can't do it by myself, but if we do it, I think we could be successful. The results are not guaranteed. We might all be out on the street. Who knows? But I need your personal commitment. David, I need your personal commitment that you will help me make this happen. And then she supported us all the way through. She gave us cover fire. She did all the things that we needed to have happen in order to pull that off. And we actually delivered on the promise that we had made to both the company and to the market. And it was all because she led with courage and transparency. She built consensus. She didn't lead by consensus. She built consensus for the leadership decision that needed to be made. And that was just such a powerful leadership experience. And I love Anne. She's great. She's fantastic.
It's quite a good example of integrity as well, isn't it? Really, it's backing the right choice, even when it would be very easy to say, well, that's what the boss told me to do, so it's not my fault if it goes wrong.
Yeah. Or sitting in there with all of those folks, all those buyers, and saying, see, I told you so. Right? Well, what good did that do?
Yeah. And of course, the other way of doing it would have been just not doing what the bosses wanted and only doing what you knew was right. But I think that would have been politically even more dangerous. So, I really like that example.
Well, the reality is if she had taken that path, she would have never been sitting at that table to offer right. what the market actually wanted. They would have taken her out way earlier and put somebody else in, and then we would have been done. So you're right. That she did avoid those extremes. I hadn't really thought as much about it from that perspective. I think that's a good insight.
Yeah, I mean, it's politically very canny as well, I think, the way she's handled that. So, interesting. Great example. And I love the first example as well, because it triggered a memory for me as well from, I think, my first or second ever job. like 20 years ago now. It was a temp job. I was doing accounting, data entry in this tiny little local office of a huge multinational company. And very similarly to you, I think it was like the end of the accounting year coming up. And so everyone was working late. There was a big panic and the usual accountant was out because that's why I was there as a temp. And I wasn't an accountant. I was just typing in the numbers without knowing what any of them really meant. And
Right.
as you do when you're a student doing a temp job, right? And then the global VP of finance, or I forget his job title, I forget his surname even, but his first name was Kent. And I remember him very well because he was in because of that accounting period was coming to an end, and he was over to help us finalise it all.
Mm-hmm.
He knew my name as well before I'd even met him, despite the fact I'd been there less than a month. He sat down with me, he worked through a lot of the spreadsheets with me, explained things and why it mattered and what it was for, and then he helped me actually do the data entry as well. And this is like the international VP of a 10,000 person company, and he was sitting down typing data in with a temp.
Mm-hmm.
And he started talking to me about like what are your career plans, David? You know, what have you got in mind for your personal development? Is there any training I can help you with? Do you need a reference? Do you need an introduction to someone? Let me know. I mean, really powerful stuff that. And he even said at the time, like, it's my job to ask you these questions. So, you know, don't feel put out or anything. And I just thought, I mean, that had an impact on me as well at that such an early stage in my career in a job that I was only going to be there for 2 months total. And he was taking the time to have that conversation as though I had like a really long-term future with his company. And that's just, it's a very similar, hopefully you can see why it reminded me of that story. But
yeah, it's so powerful to be seen, to feel like you've been seen, and actually to know that you've been seen. Like there's one thing to feel like you've been seen and another thing to know that you've been seen.
Absolutely.
And that is so powerful in leadership. And I think it's so hard for people. Hey, you're a person that you don't look like me. You don't have the same background as me. You don't have whatever, right? And it can be a barrier. And I think we don't realize the value of just being human as people at work, right? Like we're people at work. And as leaders, even more so, we have to be more attuned to it because we have so many pressures as managers or leaders that when I got to deliver this by this time and it's got to be at this level of quality, and there's this bonfire that popped up over there with that person. It's you're constantly being pulled in so many directions, and it's easy to lose the humanity of it because there's so many measurable things that we're accountable to deliver, and we forget that there are people who are trying really hard. Some of them aren't really trying hard, and we talked about those folks, but the people generally are trying really hard to do a good job. And if we have, going back to that earlier conversation, if our job is to cultivate the conditions in which the team can flourish, we have to remember that the people matter. And we have to do the things that help them be seen and that help them accomplish the objectives. And I think that's really the key thing that guy did for you is like, you probably were, I don't know, maybe your fingers went faster on the 10 key after you had that conversation with him because you're like, this is great. I appreciate that. I've been seen, right? It actually has an impact on the quality and speed of people's work if they know they've been seen.
Yeah. I don't know if I went any faster, but I certainly went longer. I didn't leave the office until the work was finished. So I was there like 3 or 4 hours later than I would have been. Maybe that was his ulterior motive.
It might have been, but I know we're running short here, but I want to say something really important here because there's a trap. There's a trap with this, and you see it a lot these days. It's all over in HR and all over in business owners forums. How do we get more of that discretionary contribution from our employees? It's another one of those buzzwords, right? If you are a leader or a manager that is focused on getting more discretionary effort, you are losing the battle of leadership. It's not a thing to be extorted from people. Corporate donations are not things that good leaders look for. It's one thing to ask for an unreasonable request, Hey, this customer is in bad shape. What can we do for them? I know it's going to be a lot of extra effort. How can I help? That's a totally different conversation, a totally different mindset than how do we get more discretionary contribution. That's basically saying, I don't want to invest in my business the way I need to invest in it. So I will get the people, I will extract that from the people. And that's not what we're looking for as leaders. We're not helping people seen so that we can get more from them. And I know that's not what you were describing. And that my point is that yours is an example in the positive, which is you felt motivated, you felt seen, you made a choice, as opposed to somebody else being manipulative and saying, I'm going to make this person feel seen so that I can get more. It's a totally different environment. And I think it's important that as we lead well, as we are all on our journeys, like, I want to be a better leader. And just because I got 30 years of leadership doesn't mean that I can't improve as a leader. So I want to make sure that we're clear about what our motivations are as we lead. Why do we lead? Why do we aspire to be a manager or a person in a leadership position? We aspire to be a person in a leadership position because we believe that we have a set of skills and a set of mindset, and we have a mindset that will benefit the people that we serve. And if that's why we're going to be in leaders, we don't have to worry so much about the traps. Right. And that's really who, if we're looking to elevate leaders in an organization, that's who I look for when I'm trying to figure out who's going to be the next leader. Like, are they squeezing the blood out of the turnip, or are they creating conditions in which somebody can thrive?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And again, you triggered the memory there as well. Like 3 or 4 years later, 2 jobs later, completely opposite circumstance, really, where it wasn't even about me. I just happened to be in the room and overheard a conversation where I won't give names or titles, but one boss was talking to another boss. I was just talking about, so-and-so, his work's all right, but, he's always out the door at 5:30 and, I don't really feel like I can count on him. And you're just like, when you're having that conversation in front of employees. And so that is an immediate impact on the culture, isn't it? And the expectation you're setting there. Maybe it was deliberate, maybe it wasn't, don't know. But either way, like, it's the beginnings of a toxic environment, isn't it? When you start bad-mouthing people behind their back in front of others, and yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you got to watch what we say. Words matter.
Indeed, yes. And on that note, I'll stop complaining about former bosses. So.
Hey, look, I think that there is so much to be learned from people who don't do it right. Like, we definitely want to orient our minds towards the good things, right? We want to hold up the examples of the folks that do this well, but it is also instructive. Like, there's a reason that when you go to driver's school here in the US, they don't show you pictures of shiny new cars on the car lot. They show you the mangled wreck, right? Because you don't dwell on it. Not like, if you looked at percentage of time where you look at the mangled wreck versus that you learn the proper way to do things, it's a really small percentage of the time, but it's so powerful, right? Like, don't be that, be this instead. And so we don't want to dwell on it, but the fact is that we've learned a lot in our lives based on things that have gone well and things that have not gone well. And it's the sum total of those things that allow us to bring along the next generation of leaders and say, like, hey, do these things, don't do those things.
Yes. I tend to think there's more to be learned from mistakes as well. I don't know. Maybe I'm a pessimist at heart. I'm not sure.
Well, let's not label things, but let's have just a brief moment, if I may. So you have for people that are just listening and don't necessarily see the video, you have a picture behind you of a line of World War II Spitfires. Mm-hmm. Very cool airplane. And one of the things that aviators learned during World War II, and again, apologies to the people who might be listening who have difficulty with the military construct, but this is instructive. One of the things that they learned is that when those flyers were going towards their objective, They were flying towards maybe a bridge they had to take out or something like that. Very often the pilot would fly into the target. They would release their ordnance, or maybe they wouldn't even release their ordnance. They would just fly into the target, and they didn't realize they were doing it. And it came to be known as target fixation, where you fly into the thing that you are looking at, and all of the other processes of, pitch and yaw and attitude and altitude and all that kind of stuff, they fade into the background because we're so stuck looking at the target. And what we learn from that, from a behavioral standpoint, from a brain standpoint, is that we go toward the thing that we focus on. So if we focus on the things that we're learning from the bad examples, we're very likely to begin to become the bad examples that we have consumed. So what we want to do is the target is the target. It's a fundamentally important thing. And we want to keep our eye on it, but we don't want that to become the primary focus. So if we can learn what we need to learn from the negative examples, and we offset that with an appropriate amount of positive examples, these are the people that we want to emulate. We will become more like the people we want to emulate than the people that we don't. So there's value in both, and balance is the key.
I agree with you. I see what you're saying, and I see your point. I think, and maybe it's a psychology thing as well, but the reason I think you learn more from mistakes is because you want to, if that makes sense. So that's gone wrong. I need to understand why, so I don't do that again.
Sure.
And so, whereas with a success, you're like, that's gone brilliantly. Most people won't think about why did that go well. They'll just be like, oh, that's done, job done, move on to the next thing.
Yeah. And my goal here is not to say that there's nothing to be learned. Like for the forensic analysis is super critical. I mean, if you want to find out how to not build buildings that fall down, you should examine buildings that fell down, right? and do something different than what happened there. And so I think my point that I'm trying to make is not to say that it's bad to look at them, but if we consume an equal diet, and one of the things that you said is like, it's hard to understand what went right. And I agree with that. And one of the things that leaders do is things that are challenging. So why did it go right? How can I learn from what went right? Right. And, I'm listening to some podcasts, and people love Charlie Munger. And, but he just recently passed away, but he was Warren Buffett's right-hand guy, right? And that guy saw the world a particular way, and he was very liberal in sharing how he saw it. So if we want to know how things went really, really well, like there are ways to study people who've gone really, really well. And so I think it's an invitation to keep a balanced diet of what went wrong and how can we not do that? How can we make it better? And where are the people who are doing things differently and well? And what can we also learn from them? And by keeping it in balance, we become the most powerful leaders of the next generation. I think that's really the key thing that I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. And I was going to say, I think the important thing is in that root cause analysis, isn't it?
Sure.
But where people go wrong quite often is they'll only apply it to the failures. Whereas, as you say, it needs to be balanced. You need to look at, doesn't matter what the outcome is, figure out why that outcome happened.
Yeah. And a lot of times I think we can wallow in the pain of the thing that didn't go well. True. And that's a really easy thing. That guy was an idiot. Well, maybe he wasn't an idiot. Maybe with empathy, maybe he was doing exactly the right thing. He just wasn't qualified. Okay. If he wasn't qualified, where am I not qualified? Yeah. Where am I not paying attention? Like that's the value of doing it. So 100% it's valuable to look back. It's just critical that our mindset be in the right place so we don't fly into the target and become the person we don't want to be.
Yep. I'm with you.
Leadership Heroes.
There's a load of questions that I've not had time to ask. There is one left that I have to ask you because everyone gets this question, and it's called Leadership Heroes. So the question is, if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone, alive, dead, past, present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Well, I have to tell you that I've already answered that question, and I would put Anne as the person who I would say is the leadership hero. Like there's all these famous people, right? You can talk about all these famous people who did amazing leadership things, but the problem is I don't have any context with those folks, right? And so, again, I think I would go back to Anne, and I would say, in my personal experience, Anne just embodied for me what it means to be an empathetic leader who does challenging things and brings people along. She brought the level of every one of those people up. In fact, I just had lunch with two guys that I worked with 30 years ago. Just earlier this week, I had lunch with them. And we're talking about the place we worked 30 years ago, right? And that's the culture that Anne created. I don't think we had core values on the wall, or we didn't, we had Thomas Watson's think slogan, right? And we had this rebus. I have behind me a famous Paul Rand designed IBM logo with an eyeball and a bumblebee and the 8-bar M. We were trying to think differently, right? And that culture that Anne created of camaraderie and teamwork and sense of purpose and mission and dependence on each other. Anne's probably like, wow, that's not, I don't know if that's what I had in mind, but that's what I took from it. That she was out walking around. She was present. She was seen. She was listening. She was inspiring and encouraging. I mean, those things to me are what leadership is about, is helping people to be the best version of themselves in that time and for that purpose. And so that's why I would say I'm returning to Anne as the most impactful person that I feel like I've been led by, and this would be a leadership hero.
Yeah, and it is a great story, as we've established. So yeah, love that. And I do agree with you as well. Like there's so many historical figures. There's like an infinite number of fictional ones we could choose as well. Mm. And they're all really interesting, and I love talking about them, but they're not as powerful and as meaningful as the personal connections, the ones where you've actually worked for them, you've directly experienced their leadership, and you know the impacts that had on you, the way that made you feel. You still remember it and talk about it 30 years later. You know, that's the real excitement, the optimism, the power of leadership. And I love hearing stories like that. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the chance to celebrate those folks.
Absolutely. Celebrate, that's the right word, definitely. Well, Dave, it's been wonderful talking with you today. Thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time and your stories and experiences as well. Last thing I will ask you, if any of the listeners, and I'm sure many of them would, like to learn more about you, perhaps get in touch, is there a website or similar that you could point them towards?
There is. They can connect with me on LinkedIn, David-C-Bates, or they can go to the website. It's www.paravelle.com. It's Paravelle.
Excellent. And I'll pop the links for both of those in the episode description so people can find it easily.
That would be great. Thanks.
Well, that's it. I was going to say that's all we've got time for. We've gone over time, so that's all we didn't have time for. But yeah, have a great rest of your day and lovely weekend.
Thank you. It's been fantastic to talk to you.
Likewise. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Take care.
Thank you again, Dave, for your time and your thoughts today. Really appreciate your contributions. I'm sure the listener does too. And we're having such an interesting and in-depth conversation there that I barely covered any of the questions that I had for you, but the ones we did get to led to really interesting conversations. So yes, thank you very much. Listener, if you would like to learn more about Dave and what he does, have a look in the episode notes and you will find the links mentioned just now. I do encourage you, as always, take a look, reach out to him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Are you new to leadership? Are you having difficulty with that sole contributor to team leader transition? It can be a lonely place to be, but you are not alone. Join our online leadership community today, and you'll not only get access to a curated collection of leadership resources and guides, regular live events, and more, but you'll also be able to meet, learn from, and share experiences with other leaders too. It's designed for new managers just like you, listener. So sign up today for a complimentary 60-day access. Your engagement and honest feedback are the only price of entry for those first 2 months. And after that, there is a free forever plan as well. Check it out now at www.leadernotaboss.com. And thank you for being with us today. Tune in again next week. And until then, keep on keeping on and be a leader, not a boss.